The vending machine hummed and rattled every few seconds, like it was fighting to stay awake. Bleach and recycled air pressed heavy against Rhett Calloway's lungs. Grey-speckled linoleum stretched endlessly in both directions. And a doctor stood 3 feet away, clipboard held against his chest like a shield. The explanation had come in clinical fragments: a severe drug reaction, an emergency cross-reference against a corporate marrow registry he had forgotten about, a 50% haplotype match, parental match. Mr. Calloway, Ivy is your biological daughter. Have you ever learned something that made you question everything you thought you understood about your own life? Something that reached into the bedrock of your reality and shifted it, and suddenly nothing looked the same? The strength left Rhett's legs. His hand shot out, finding the wall, palm flat against cold tile. His wedding ring struck the surface with a sharp click that echoed down the empty corridor. A sound tore from somewhere deep in his chest. Low, raw, animal. The kind of sound a man makes when something buried for years finally breaks through to air. This man held his own daughter's hand for 6 years, read to her, watched her grow, felt an inexplicable pull toward her every single month, and never once knew she was his. How does that happen? How does a father miss his own child standing right in front of him? She was his. She had always been his. But to understand how a man can hold his own daughter's hand for 6 years and never know the truth, you have to go back to the beginning. If you're new here, welcome. I'm glad you found your way. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, that subscribe button means you'll never miss one of these moments. Now, let me take you back. The first Saturday of every month. That was the rhythm Rhett Calloway kept more faithfully than any board meeting or investor call. He would leave his corner office on the 42nd floor, loosen his tie before the elevator doors closed, and drive 40 minutes to a place where nobody cared about his last name or his net worth. Briarwood sat at the end of a gravel road. Oak trees older than any child inside lined the path, their roots cracking through the edges of crumbling pavement. Red brick softened by decades of weather and quiet wear. A wooden sign beside the front door read, "Every child deserves a story." It wasn't grand. It wasn't hopeful in the glossy way charity brochures pretend places are hopeful. It was honest. Tired, still standing. He always brought books. Today, a hardcover copy of The Secret Garden. Not new, well loved, cracked spine, and the faint smell of cedar pressed between its pages. He had found it in an antique bookstore 3 days earlier, wedged between 2 volumes nobody wanted. The moment his fingers touched the cover, he thought of Ivy. On the drive, a coat lay folded on the leather passenger seat beside him, resting neatly where a person should have been. He never noticed the empty space. He never did. 8 years old. Brown curls that refused to stay behind her ears, no matter how many times someone tried to pin them back. Eyes the color of honey held up to afternoon light. A gap-toothed grin that could stop you mid-stride and make you forget where you were walking. She had a ritual with books, one no adult had taught her, and no child her age should have invented on her own. She pressed her palm flat against every cover before opening it, eyes closed. Exactly 2 seconds, like greeting an old friend. Mr. Calloway, sneakers squeaking on tile, one lace untied, dragging behind her. She crashed into his legs with the full, unguarded force of a child who hadn't yet learned to hold anything back. He crouched down to meet her. "Hey, little bird." She took the book from his hands, turned it over once, pressed her palm flat against the worn cover, closed her eyes. 1 second, 2, then opened them with a small, satisfied breath. "It smells old," she said. "I like it." Their bench sat by the window in the reading room. The same one every visit. As though it belonged to them by some unspoken agreement the other children respected without being asked. Afternoon sun fell in long gold rectangles across the floor, warming the wood beneath them. He read aloud. She leaned against his arm with the unself-conscious weight of a child who had decided, without deliberation or doubt, that this person was safe. Every time he read a line she loved, every time a sentence landed somewhere deep in her small chest, she tapped his wrist. Twice. Quick, light, their signal. He never taught her that. She never explained why she started. It simply began. The very first visit, her tiny fingers finding his wrist, 2 quick taps, as if some part of her already knew a language she had never been taught, a rhythm carried in blood and bone, a signal sent across a gap neither of them understood. He paused during a passage about a character who refused to leave a locked garden, even when everyone told her there was nothing left inside worth saving. He closed the book on his thumb to hold the page. "What do you think of her?" he asked. Ivy tilted her head, a gesture that always caught him off guard, though he could never explain why it felt so familiar. "I think she's brave," she said. "Not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that stays." Something in his chest shifted. Not painfully, more like a door moving on old hinges when a draft finds the gap beneath it. A movement so slight you would miss it if you were not paying attention. But he felt it. He always felt it with her. On the bench, there was space on Ivy's other side. Empty. She glanced at it sometimes. Quickly, almost unconsciously, a flicker of her honey-colored eyes toward the gap, as if expecting someone to be sitting there. She never mentioned it. Whoever she was looking for never appeared. Rhett lingered at the door when the visit ended, watching Ivy walk back toward the reading room. She turned at the last moment, waved, small, casual, the kind of gesture that should not carry the weight it did. He waved back. His hand stayed raised a beat too long after she had already disappeared around the corner. In the car, his driver glanced at the rearview mirror. Something was off. Rhett stared out the window at nothing, his jaw set, his hands still in his lap. He did not speak for the entire drive home. He told himself it was charity, generosity, a good man doing a good thing for a child who had no one. But charity does not make your chest ache when you leave. Charity does not keep you awake at 2 in the morning, wondering if she is sleeping okay. If someone remembered to leave the hallway light on because she is afraid of the dark. Charity does not make you search antique bookstores for hours, because a little girl once said she liked the way old pages smell. He arrived at his penthouse, stepped inside. The door closed behind him, and the silence of a very large, very expensive space pressed in from every direction. The kind of quiet that does not comfort, only confirms. A dining table stretched across the room, long and polished, set for one. 6 chairs surrounded it, all empty. He had never counted the chairs before. Tonight, for reasons he could not explain, he counted them twice. Rhett Calloway did not know why this child had a gravitational pull on his soul. He would find out soon enough, and the answer would crack open every wall he had built around his understanding of his own life. The books, the bench by the window, the 2 taps on his wrist every time a sentence landed somewhere deep, the ache that settled behind his ribs on the drive home, heavy, formless, refusing to dissolve until the next first Saturday arrived. That was the rhythm of Rhett Calloway's life, the part that mattered. But something was coming. Something that would turn a routine hospital visit into the most devastating revelation of his life. And the thread that would pull everything apart started with a phone call on an ordinary Tuesday. To understand what that call destroyed, you have to understand the 2 worlds Rhett Calloway inhabited and the vast distance between them. The 42nd floor of Calloway Industries was a machine built for precision. Glass walls overlooking a city that spread below like a model someone had assembled with careful, distant hands. Miniature and untouchable from that height, the sharp click of leather dress shoes on polished floor. The deadening hush of advanced climate systems, creating a vacuum where nothing existed except productivity, and the muted tension of people trying to impress a man who rarely needed to raise his voice. Rhett commanded boardrooms with a tone that never climbed, but somehow made every person in the room adjust their posture. Decisive, controlled, untouchable. When he spoke, outcomes shifted. When he paused, people held their breath. None of it had ever kept him awake at night. But the drive he was about to make, the phone call waiting at the end of an ordinary Tuesday, would prove that all the control in the world cannot protect you from the one thing you never see coming. That was one world. The other began, 40 minutes later, somewhere around minute 3 of the drive, when his fingers found his tie and loosened the knot. By minute 20, his posture had changed, shoulders dropping, the rigid architecture of his spine softening into something less guarded, less armored. By the time gravel crunched under his tires and the oak trees of briarwood closed in overhead, the CEO had dissolved entirely. What replaced him was softer, unprotected, a version of himself he never showed anyone in the glass towers, because that version would not survive up there. Briarwood never pretended to be more than it was. The faint, persistent smell of industrial pine cleaner fought a losing battle against old radiator dust in every hallway. Overhead lights hummed with a low, erratic buzz the staff had long stopped hearing. Mismatched donated books lined the shelves in the reading room, some glossy and barely touched, others held together by tape and loyalty, their fabric spines peeling away like old wallpaper. Heavy fire doors clanged shut with a hollow clatter that echoed down long linoleum corridors. Children's voices filtered through thick cinderblock walls, muffled, distant, alive. The staff performed daily miracles on budgets that would make corporate accountants wince, and not one of them complained about it where the children could hear. One world had everything and felt empty. The other had almost nothing and felt full. That was the contradiction Rhett lived inside, and he had never found a way to resolve it, only to keep driving between the two and pretending the distance did not say something about him. At 2 in the morning, when sleep refused to come, his footsteps echoed on cold, heavily veined marble as he walked through rooms no one else occupied. Past the kitchen, past the study, past the dining room, where that long table sat waiting in the dark, polished, surrounded by chairs no guest had ever pulled back. Some nights, the silence felt like company. Other nights, it felt like evidence. He would pour a glass of water, stand at the window, and look out at a city full of people who would trade everything for what he had, never knowing he would trade all of it for what they did. The visits to Briarwood accumulated across months, then years, each one adding another layer to something Rhett could not define and did not try to. He simply showed up, brought books, sat on the bench, read aloud, and the thing between him and Ivy grew the way roots grow, silent, underground, impossible to pull up without destroying something essential. There was the afternoon she asked him why he always came. He had paused mid-page, caught off guard by a question that should have had a simple answer but did not. "Because you haven't finished telling me what you think of the story," he said. She accepted this without pressing. Children accept love more easily than adults do. They do not need it explained or justified. They just need it to keep showing up. One visit, she handed him a drawing, a picture of a house with 2 stick figures standing in front of it. One tall, one small. A lopsided sun hovering above them. Underneath, in careful block letters, she had written a single word, home. He thanked her, folded it carefully, slipped it into his jacket pocket without looking at it again until he was alone. It lived in his desk drawer now, at the office. Bottom right, beneath contracts worth more than Briarwood would see in a decade. He had never told anyone it was there. Rain pressed low and grey against every window. The afternoon ivy was quieter than normal, turning pages without comment, her curls still damp from running between buildings. She looked up from the book in her lap and asked, "Do you have kids, Mr. Calloway?" He said no. She nodded, looked back at her book, did not mention it again. The question lodged in his ribcage for 3 days, pressing against something he could not reach. She told him about a dream once, a house with a big garden, someone who raided to her every night, not just the first Saturday, every night. She described it plainly, the way children describe things they want so badly, they have already started pretending they do not care. He did not respond for a long time. She did not press him. They sat in the quiet together, and the silence held everything neither of them knew how to say. Small things surfaced across the visits too, details visible to anyone watching closely enough. The way she tilted her head when she was working through a thought, chin dropping slightly to the left. He did the same thing in meetings, though he had never seen himself do it. The way she wrinkled her nose a half-second before she laughed, a tell so specific it could not have been learned. A gesture she made with her hands when she was excited, fingers spreading wide, then curling into fists, as if trying to catch the feeling before it escaped. His hands did the exact same thing when something mattered. Identical, down to the timing. Nobody noticed. Nobody was looking for it. Not yet. During one visit, late autumn, the reading room warmer than usual because someone had finally fixed the radiator nearest the bench, Ivy told Rhett about a story. Not one from their collection. Something older. Something someone had read to her a long time ago. Before Briarwood, when she was very small, she could not remember much. Something about a garden, a woman singing, a child who got lost but was never really lost, because someone was always looking for her. "Can you find it, Mr. Calloway? The book with the singing lady?" He promised. He searched. Antique stores on weekends. Rare book dealers through his assistant. Online catalogues listing out-of-print editions going back decades. But she could not remember enough details. Not the title, not the author, not whether the garden had flowers or trees or both. The story might not even be a published book at all. It might be a memory, something someone told her in the dark, before she had language to hold it properly. He never found it. He never stopped looking. And the question of who had read it to her and where it came from burned quietly underneath everything else. A low flame neither of them could name. On the nights Rhett came home late from Briarwood, the penthouse was not empty. Dorian would be there, moving through the kitchen with practiced ease, adjusting a light, setting out a glass of water on the counter as if he had calculated the exact minute of arrival. Dorian had been with the Calloway family since before Rhett could form memories, taught him to tie his shoes on a quiet Sunday morning when the house smelled of coffee and furniture polish, drove him to school every day for 11 years, sat outside his bedroom door the night Rhett's mother died, not speaking, not knocking, just present, a quiet wait against the other side of the wood. For hours, until the sun came up and the worst night of a boy's life had passed. The closest thing Rhett had ever had to a father. Their exchanges were brief and warm, the kind of conversations that happen between people who have known each other so long that most of the meaning lives in what is not said. "Long day?" Dorian would ask. The usual, Rhett would answer, setting his keys on the counter. Sometimes he would mention Briarwood in passing, casually, the way you mention routine things to someone you trust completely. Dorian would nod, listen, say something about rest, and the evening would settle the way every evening settled in that house. Quietly, gently, a rhythm both men had kept for years. Tuesday, Calloway Industries boardroom. 12 people seated around the conference table, quarterly projections glowing on the screen behind Rhett's shoulder as he walked them through the numbers. Mid-sentence, his phone vibrated against the glass surface. He glanced down. Briarwood. He excused himself, stepped into the hallway, pressed the phone to his ear. 2 sentences rearranged everything inside him. Severe allergic reaction. Emergency transport to the pediatric wing. Everything after that happened at a speed governed by a single impulse. His hands were slick on the steering wheel. The city smeared past the windshield in streaks of grey and white. Red lights meant nothing. Speed limits were suggestions offered by a world that did not understand what was pulling him forward. Faster than reason, faster than logic, faster than any instinct he could name or justify. The pediatric wing smelled like sanitizing wipes layered over warm blankets. The crinkle of a plastic mattress cover shifting beneath a child's weight. The synchronized sigh of an automated blood pressure cuff cycling through its reading. And 4-line ran from her small arm to a bag hanging above the bed rail. Her eyes were closed. Her curls spread across a flat white pillow. She looked so small, as though the bed were trying to swallow her whole, and she was too tired to fight it. Rhett crossed the room in 3 strides, took command the way he took command of everything, because control was the only language he had when fear started speaking louder than he could think. Tell me what she needs, whatever it costs, whatever it takes. Right now, not a request. The voice of a man who expected the world to bend when he spoke. Then he sat beside her, took her hand, warm, so small against his palm, held it the way you hold something you are terrified of breaking, gently, firmly, with every ounce of steadiness you could manufacture when your insides were falling apart. If you have ever felt a connection to someone that you could not explain, something deeper than logic, something your mind could not justify but your body understood completely, drop a word in the comments that describes that feeling. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time, because this story is just getting started and you will not want to miss what happens next. Ivy stabilized within the hour. The monitors settled into a steady rhythm. Color returned to her cheeks. Her breathing evened out. And for the first time since he had walked through those doors, the iron band around Rhett's chest loosened enough for him to draw a full breath. Relief flooded through him, the kind that leaves your hands shaking and your vision blurred at the edges. He leaned back in the chair, pressed his palms against his eyes, exhaled. Then the doctor appeared in the doorway, clipboard pressed to his chest, a pause that stretched one beat too long. His eyes shifted, not evasive, but careful, the way medical professionals look at you when they are choosing words that will change a life. Mr. Calloway, could I speak with you in the corridor? There's something you need to know. Rhett stepped into that hallway as one man. He would walk back into that room as someone else entirely. The hospital corridor. Ivy stabilized behind a closed door. The soft pulse of monitors fading as Rhett stepped out and pulled the door shut behind him. Carefully, slowly, so the click would not wake her. The doctor stood 3 feet away, clipboard held against his chest, something heavy in his expression that had nothing to do with the emergency they had just navigated. What the doctor said next would crack open a truth that had been buried for 6 years, and once it was spoken, nothing in Rhett Calloway's life would ever look the same. The doctor spoke with the measured precision of someone who had delivered difficult news before, but never news quite like this. He walked Rhett through the medical chain, Ivy's cutaneous drug reaction, the emergency HLA typing required before further treatment could proceed, the automatic cross-reference against the National Marrow Donor Registry, standard protocol, routine procedure, except the system had flagged something that was anything but routine. A profile submitted 3 years earlier, a corporate wellness and charity drive, Calloway Industries, a buccal swab from a CEO who had participated without a second thought and never considered it again. 50% haplotype match, parental match. Mr. Calloway, Ivy is your biological daughter. For a handful of seconds, his mind did what it had been trained to do in every high-stakes moment of his career. It rejected the impossible, constructed a wall, found the flaw in the argument. There has been a mistake. His voice emerged calm, controlled, the executive speaking, the voice that redirected outcomes, that turned problems into logistics. A registration error. Someone transposed a file number. The doctor did not flinch. No defensiveness crossed his face. Only the steady expression of a man who had already verified his ground twice before standing on it. We ran it twice, Mr. Calloway. The phenotypic markers, her blood type, her enzymatic profile, are consistent with paternal inheritance. There is no error. The wall held for one more breath. Then arithmetic arrived. And arithmetic does not care about walls. She was 8. He lost Yovienne 7 years ago. The numbers assembled with merciless clarity, lining up like a sequence that had been waiting years for someone to finally read it. Yovienne had been pregnant when she disappeared, weeks along perhaps, early enough that she may not have known herself, early enough that whatever separated them, whoever separated them, had torn apart not 2 lives but 3. And their child, the child born from a love he had never fully protected, had ended up 40 minutes from his corner office. at a home at the end of a gravel road, and he had walked through that front door month after month, year after year, drawn by something he called generosity because the truth was too enormous to see from inside it. His body understood before his mind finished processing. The corridor seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. The overhead lights flared too bright. His legs failed him, not dramatically but completely, the strength simply departing as if someone had cut the cables holding him upright. He caught himself against the wall, shoulder striking the surface, his hand splaying flat against cold tile to keep from going all the way down. A sound escaped him, guttural, broken, something that had lived underground for 6 years, finally clawing its way into air. 6 years. He had been visiting his own daughter for 6 years, holding her hand, reading her stories, feeling that gravitational pull, the force that dragged him back to Briarwood every first Saturday without explanation or reason. His blood had known. His bones had known. Every cell in his body had been sending a signal his conscious mind refused to receive. He walked back into her room on legs that felt borrowed from someone else. She was still sleeping. The floor dripped its patient rhythm. The monitor traced its slow green line. A heartbeat, his daughter's heartbeat, and every time the word crossed his mind, it detonated silently in his chest, sending tremors through walls he had spent years constructing without knowing what they were built to contain. He sat beside her, took her hand again, the same hand he had held an hour ago, but the contact had transformed entirely. The warmth was the same. The smallness against his palm was the same. But now every crease, every fingerprint, every line was a map he could finally read. He studied her face with new eyes. Her curls, dark, stubborn, refusing to stay where anyone placed them. Those belonged to Jovienne. Every strand, the angle of her jaw, the set of her chin even in sleep, those were his. The honey-colored eyes behind those closed lids, a blend of both, something neither parent could have predicted. Something entirely new and entirely theirs. A face built from two people who had loved each other and never knew they had created someone who would outlast every failure, every silence, every mistake they had ever made. Tears came without permission. He did not fight them. They fell onto the thin hospital blanket, darkening the pale fabric in small, uneven circles, each one silent, each one carrying the weight of a year he could not recover. He pressed his forehead against her fingers. I bought you books when I should have bought you a home. The words barely formed, fractured at every edge. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. She stirred in her sleep, did not wake. Her fingers curled, reflexive, instinctive, and for one devastating moment, she held on, her small hand closing around his thumb, the way a newborn grips the parent who should have been there from the beginning. If he had been there, if he had known. If someone had not stolen the chance. 6 years, 2 taps. The signal had been there all along. The next morning, Rhett drove to Briarwood. Not on a Saturday, not with a book in the passenger seat. He drove with the DNA report folded inside his jacket pocket and a single question burning through everything else. Who was her mother? Director Pembroke's office sat at the end of a second-floor hallway. Small room. The smell of old paper and peppermint. A tin of mints perpetually open on the desk, offered to every overwhelmed caseworker and every crying child who sat in the chair across from her. Filing cabinets lined every wall, stuffed past capacity, drawers refusing to close completely. Her desk vanished under the administrative weight of too many children and not enough of anything else. She had never seen him like this. 6 years of monthly visits, and he had always arrived composed. Pressed shirt, book in hand, that quiet steadiness she had come to associate with his presence. Today, no tie, unshaven, something raw behind his eyes that she could not name but recognized on instinct, the look of a person whose understanding of their own life had been demolished overnight. I need Ivy's complete file, he said. Every record, every document. Pembroke did not waver. Mr. Calloway, I cannot do that. The biological records are sealed, statutory prohibition. If I breach confidentiality, we lose our funding and I lose my license. She paused, held his gaze. I have watched you love that child for 6 years, and if there were a way around this, I would find it. But I cannot hand you that file. He reached into his jacket, unfolded the DNA report, set it on her desk without a word. She read it. Her hands went still, both palms flattening against the surface, the document caught between them. She looked up, really looked, and something shifted behind her eyes. Not compliance, something more human than that. Compassion meeting the boundary of what the law allowed and deciding to stand as close to that edge as conscience permitted. She could not give him the sealed records, but she opened the non-sealed intake document, the administrative form filed when Ivy first arrived at Briarwood. Basic information only, date of entry, age at intake, and one line under mother's name, listed on the original notation before the court sealed everything else. Jovienne. He read it 3 times. His vision blurred on the second reading. By the third, his hands shook so badly the paper rattled against Pembroke's desk, a dry, trembling sound that filled the small office like a second heartbeat. The name opened a door he had bricked shut 7 years ago, and everything behind it rushed forward. Not the grand memories, the small ones, the kind that lodge in the body long after the mind tries to file them away. The way she laughed with her entire self, leaning back, one hand pressed to her collarbone, as if trying to hold the joy inside her chest before it spilled over. The scent of cocoa butter and rain-soaked gardens that lived in the curve of her neck. The way she would trace letters on his chest with her fingertip in the dark, slowly, deliberately, spelling words she never said aloud. He had asked her once what she was writing. Everything I'm afraid to say, her voice barely a whisper. If I write it on your skin, maybe you'll carry it even when I can't say it out loud. He had carried it. 7 years. Without knowing what the words were, he had carried them, pressed into his skin like invisible ink, legible only to the body that received them. And there was something else she used to do, something the memory of her name dragged back from beneath 7 years of silence. When he read to her, in their apartment, his voice low in the dark while the city hummed outside the window, every time he reached a line she loved, she tapped his wrist. Twice. Quick, light, the same signal, the same rhythm. Passed from mother to daughter, through blood and bone, across 7 years of separation, a language never taught, never explained, written somewhere deeper than memory. He told himself he had looked for Jovienne. After she vanished, after the disconnected number, the empty department, the silence that swallowed her without explanation, he told himself he had searched. But had he fought? Had he torn through every door? Had he refused to stop? No. He had grieved quietly, privately, built his company into something enormous, a monument to distraction, a structure of endless productivity designed to keep him too occupied to feel the hole she left behind. He told himself the work mattered, that building something massive meant building something meaningful. But meaning was not in the glass towers. It was 40 minutes away, pressing its palm against book covers. And all along, their daughter had been speaking a language she had never been taught, sending a signal through her blood that neither of them understood. Rhett closed the file, stood, looked out Pembroke's window at the gravel road and the oak trees standing in the morning light, their branches shifting in a wind he could not feel through the glass. He had a daughter, he had a name, and somewhere in this world, the woman who gave both of them life was still breathing, still carrying the weight of a disappearance that was never her choice. It took Rhett 3 days to find Jovienne, not the broken, vanished woman he expected. What he found instead would make his glass towers, his boardroom authority, and every wall he had built to protect himself look fragile. The DNA report, Jovienne's name on a faded intake form, 7 years of silence that Rhett had accepted as abandonment, never questioning hard enough, never pushing far enough, never fighting with the desperation the situation deserved. All of it sat in his chest like a stone he could not swallow or spit out. Rhett Calloway had the resources to find almost anyone on the planet, private investigators on retainer, proprietary databases, connections that moved faster than legal systems typically allowed. The infrastructure he commanded to find her was built from the same fortune and the same corporate machinery that someone had already used to make her disappear. He was searching with the very tools that had been turned against her. But finding Jovienne would not just mean locating a woman who had vanished 7 years ago. It would mean confronting the terrifying possibility that her disappearance was never an accident, and the even more terrifying truth that he had never fought hard enough to learn what really happened. 3 days. That is how long it took. And each one carved a different wound. Day 1 was dead ends. Old addresses that led to apartments long since rented to strangers who had never heard the name. Phone numbers disconnected years ago, their digital traces scrubbed clean. A forwarding address filed with the postal service that pointed to a P.O. box closed 11 months after it was opened. Every thread went cold almost immediately, and the pattern of those dead ends told its own story. This was not the trail of a woman who had drifted away. This was a trail that had been methodically erased, deliberately, by someone who understood how information systems worked and how to make a person vanish from them. Rhett did not see that pattern yet. He was too deep inside the search, too desperate for the next lead, too focused on forward motion to step back and ask the question that should have stopped him cold. Who had the knowledge, the access, and the motive to erase Jovienne this thoroughly? He was hunting for a woman he believed had walked away. He did not yet understand that he was actually tracing the edges of a cage someone had built around her, using his own name as the lock. His office saw a version of him no one recognized. Unshaven for the first time anyone on the executive floor could remember, tie abandoned on the back of his chair since the hospital, the polished surface of his authority cracking like old lacquer, revealing something underneath that was raw, more human, and far more unsettling to the people who depended on him being untouchable. Board members exchanged glances across conference tables. His assistant left meals outside his office door, a sandwich at noon, soup at 6, and retrieved them hours later, untouched. Day 2 brought a thread, thin at first, almost invisible, a byline buried in the archives of a mid-tier investigative publication, a name attached to a story about a county foster system that had lost track of 14 children across 2 fiscal years. He read the byline twice, read the article 3 times, then searched the name against every publication database his team could access. Another article appeared, then another, a pattern emerging the way a photograph develops in solution. Slowly, unmistakably, the outline of a life revealing itself through work that carried a voice he would have recognized anywhere. Day 3 brought confirmation, and what he found stole his breath. Jovienne had not hidden. She had not curled into her grief and let it close over her. She had risen. Over 7 years, she had built herself into a respected investigative journalist, the kind whose byline appeared in publications that made powerful people uncomfortable, the kind whose phone calls prompted legal teams to convene emergency meetings. She specialized in stories no one else would touch: missing people lost inside broken systems, children swallowed by bureaucratic failures, mothers separated from their babies by institutions that moved too slowly to care and too quickly to question. The cruel irony settled over him like cold water. A woman who lost her own child had spent 7 years finding everyone else's. Rhett sat in his study at 2 in the morning, laptop open on the desk, reading article after article. Her voice came through every sentence, sharp, precise, every word placed with the deliberate weight of a stone, dropped into still water. She never sensationalized, never reached for easy outrage. She laid facts end to end and let them build a case so airtight that the institutions she exposed could not dismiss her without proving her point. She had spent months on single stories, running utility records through skip-tracing databases, filing public records requests that came back redacted, cross-referencing foster placement data across multiple states, hitting wall after wall, each dead end only reinforcing her certainty that someone, somewhere, had deliberately erased the trail she was trying to follow. And as he read, absorbing the scope of what she had built, the precision of her methodology, the relentless discipline of her craft, He realized something that rearranged his understanding of who she was. Fundamentally, permanently, she had not waited to be rescued. She had not sat in the wreckage of what happened to her and hoped for someone with resources and reach to come find her. She had taken the worst thing that ever happened to her, the loss of her daughter, the erasure of her identity, the destruction of a life she should have had, and she had turned it into a weapon for other people's survival. She had built herself without his money, without his name, without his help, without anyone's permission, into someone extraordinary. And the scale of that achievement, the sheer, staggering force of will it required, made his glass towers look like toys, made his boardroom authority sound hollow, made every accomplishment he had stacked against the sky feel like what it was, a monument to distraction, constructed by a man who had everything except the courage to fight for what mattered. During that late-night reading session, the screen casting pale light across the darkened study, Rhett reached to his left for the glass of water on the shelf beside his desk. His hand found something else first. A book, worn paperback, dented cover with a crease running diagonally across the front, the kind that comes from being carried everywhere. He knew it by touch before he saw it. Jovien's, left behind 7 years ago, on the nightstand in the apartment that was emptied within days of her disappearance. He had taken it without thinking, kept it without understanding why, moved it from apartment to penthouse to study, always placing it within arm's reach, never opening it, never throwing it away, as if the book itself were a promise he did not remember making but could not bring himself to break. He opened it now. Her margin notes were still there, small, precise handwriting in blue ink, the same pen she always carried, stars next to passages she loved, question marks beside lines she wanted to argue with, underlines so firm they left grooves in the page, and in the margin of one page, page 112, beside a paragraph about someone returning to a place they thought they had lost forever, a single word in her handwriting. Ours. He did not know what it referred to. A feeling, a place, a future she had imagined before someone tore it away. But holding the book, feeling the dented cover beneath his fingers, seeing her handwriting, knowing her hands had touched these same pages, the distance between past and present collapsed. She was here, in this room, her fingerprints on these pages, her thoughts in these margins, the ghost of her presence occupying the same space, the same hour, the same late-night quiet that had once belonged to both of them. He closed the book, pressed it against his chest, and sat in the dark for a very long time. One article broke through the rest, published 14 months ago, longer than her usual pieces. 5,000 words investigating children lost in the foster system. Records sealed without explanation. Trails erased. Mothers separated from their babies and never given the legal means to find them again. The bureaucratic machinery that was supposed to protect these children instead swallowed them whole, filing them into systems so fragmented that even trained investigators could not reassemble the pieces. One sentence stopped him. He read it 4 times, each reading cutting deeper than the last. Somewhere in this country, a little girl is growing up without the sound of her mother's voice. And the system that was supposed to protect her is the same system that made her disappear. She was writing about Ivy. She did not know it, could not have known it, but she was writing about their daughter. Every source she interviewed, every database she queried, every legal pathway she pursued. She had been searching. For 7 years, through every tool her profession gave her, she had been trying to find the child who was taken from her. And every single path had closed in her face. Every door had been locked. Every trail had ended in a wall. Not the kind that forms naturally through institutional neglect, but the kind that someone builds, carefully, deliberately, with the resources to ensure that a mother and her daughter would never find each other. He closed the laptop. The screen went dark, and the study fell into the kind of silence that presses against the ears. The ice in his bourbon glass cracked. A single sharp sound that cut through the stillness. He did not call first. There was no version of this conversation that could happen through a phone line. No combination of words transmitted through a speaker that could carry what needed to be said. He booked a flight. Departure in 4 hours. If this story is hitting you somewhere you did not expect, take a second to subscribe. That way, you will be here when the rest of this unfolds. And trust me, we are nowhere near the end. The plane lifted off at dawn. Window seat, 30,000 feet of nothing between him and the woman he had never stopped carrying in the back of his mind. He stared at his reflection in the oval glass. A man worth billions, who could not buy back 7 years, could not purchase a single lost bedtime, could not write a check large enough to cover the cost of a daughter growing up without her mother's voice. The questions circled without landing. What does he say? How does he begin? Does he knock, or does he stand there until the courage assembles itself from whatever wreckage is left inside his chest? 4 words. That is all it would take to start. I found our daughter. 4 words containing an entire collapsed universe. 7 years of silence, 6 years of unknowing, a lifetime of moments that should have existed and never did. Below, the land changed. City gave way to suburbs, gave way to open stretches of green and grey. Somewhere down there, past the grid of highways and the clusters of buildings he could not distinguish from this height, was a street he had never walked, a brownstone he had never seen, a dark green door with paint chipping near the bottom hinge. In less than an hour, Rhett Calloway would stand in front of the woman he never stopped loving, the woman who vanished 7 years ago. Carrying a secret neither of them knew she held. He would knock twice. She would open the door. And the first words between them after 7 years of silence would crack open a wound that neither of them had ever been able to close. But Jovienne would not just have questions. She would have answers. Answers that would point the blame at someone Rhett trusted more than anyone alive. Rhett found Jovienne through her journalism. 7 years of bylines that told the story of a woman who had refused to disappear, even after someone tried to erase her. She had been searching for Ivy through her work without knowing it, writing about lost children while her own daughter sat 40 minutes from her father's office, pressing her palm against book covers and tapping his wrist twice every time a sentence landed. He had flown to her city without calling first, carrying 4 words that contained a collapsed universe. 7 years of silence were about to end with a knock on a dark green door. But what waited on the other side was not a simple reunion. It was a reckoning. 3rd-floor apartment. Brownstone. The narrow stairwell smelled of old wood and radiator heat. Brass mailboxes lined the wall in the lobby. Dented, half of them missing their labels. The faint scent of something cooking drifted from a neighbor's kitchen 2 doors down, warm and ordinary, utterly indifferent to the magnitude of what was about to happen in the hallway outside 3B. The dark green door, paint chipping near the bottom hinge, exactly as he had imagined during the flight. He stood in front of it for 11 seconds. He counted them, each one asking whether he was ready for what existed on the other side. None of them receiving an answer. He knocked. Once. She did not come. He knocked again. She opened on the second knock. Her face held everything a human face can hold simultaneously, and the sheer density of it should have been impossible. But there it was, contained in a single expression that moved through her features like weather crossing open land. Shock first, the kind that widens the eyes and parts the lips, the body's oldest recognition response firing before the mind can intervene. Then recognition, not just of his face, but of everything his face meant, everything it had meant, everything it had cost her. Something hot and bright flared behind her eyes, and he could not tell if it was rage or longing or both, tangled so tightly that neither could exist without the other. Pain came next, old, deep, structural, the kind that does not live in the mind but in the bones, in the architecture of the body itself. And underneath all of it, underneath the shock and the recognition and the fury and the grief, something she was clearly, visibly trying to crush before he could see it. Hope, the most dangerous thing she could feel, and she could not kill it fast enough. Rhett, Jovienne, 3 feet of worn hallway carpet, 7 years of silence, the warmth from the neighbor's kitchen, the low hum of the building's heating system through the walls. And between them, a distance that could not be measured in feet. She did not step aside. She did not invite him in. She stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame, her body blocking the threshold. Not dramatically, not aggressively, but with the quiet, immovable clarity of a woman who had rebuilt her life on the other side of that door and was not going to let anyone walk through it simply because they had decided to show up. Her apartment was behind her. Her rebuilt world was behind her. Her 7 years of survival were behind her. He did not get to enter just because he was standing there. She had changed. The softness he remembered was still present, in the curve of mouth, in the way her eyes still searched his face as if reading a language written beneath his skin. But that softness had been reinforced, sharpened, tested by years of fighting institutions and filing records requests and knocking on doors that never opened. She stood straighter. Her jaw was set with a firmness that said, "I have walked through fire. I am still standing. Do not test me." The woman he had known had been gentle. The woman in front of him was gentle and forged. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Her voice steady, her hand white-knuckled on the doorframe. "Ivy," he said. The name hit her like a physical force. Her grip on the frame tightened, knuckles pressing against wood, tendons visible beneath the skin. The color drained from her face in a single wave. What about Ivy? He delivered the truth standing in the hallway, not inside her home, not in a place where he had any right to be comfortable. He owed her that much. The discomfort of saying this on ground that was not his. She's alive. She's safe. She's been in a children's home 40 minutes from my office for 6 years. I've been sponsoring her, visiting her every month, reading to her. His voice cracked on the last word, a fracture running through the middle of his composure that he did not try to repair. "She's my daughter, Yovienne. She's our daughter. And I just found out." Yovienne slid down the doorframe. Not a collapse. Something more deliberate than that, as if her body had made a decision her mind had not authorized. She lowered herself until she was sitting on the threshold, still on her side, still inside her boundary, one hand pressed over her mouth, the other gripping the hem of her shirt, twisting the fabric between her fingers until the threads strained. The sound she made was not a scream and not a cry. It came from somewhere lower, a place beneath language, beneath thought, the deepest flaw of a grief that had lived inside her for 7 years, suddenly meeting relief for the first time. And the collision of those two forces, the devastation and the deliverance, produced a sound that human beings were never meant to hear from each other. Low, shaking, rising and falling like breath itself, had forgotten how to work. Rhett knelt in the hallway, 3 feet from her, every nerve in his body pulling toward her. That gravity between them that 7 years had not killed, that distance had not weakened, that betrayal and silence and separation had only compressed into something denser and more inescapable. But he did not touch her. He stayed on his side of the threshold, because he knew, with a clarity that had taken him far too long to develop, that he had not earned that right. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "She's beautiful," he said quietly, his voice barely holding. She presses her palm on every book before she opens it. Eyes closed, 2 seconds. Like she's greeting an old friend. He swallowed. "She has your laugh. The real one. The one where you lean back. And she does this thing. When I'm reading and she likes a passage, she taps my wrist." Twice. Yovienne's breath stopped. Her entire body went still. The kind of stillness that is not calm but is its opposite. Every muscle locked, every nerve frozen in the grip of a recognition so deep it bypassed the brain entirely and went straight to the blood. She looked up at him, and the expression on her face cracked his chest open. "I used to do that," she whispered. "With you. When you'd read to me. I'd tap your wrist twice." The hallway went silent. The worn carpet beneath their knees. The low tick of the building's heating system measuring seconds that felt like years. And between them, in the 3 feet of charged air separating a father from a mother who had been torn apart by someone else's hands, the ghost of a gesture that had traveled through blood and bone, from mother to daughter, across 7 years of separation, a signal no one taught, no one explained, written into the body like a heartbeat, like breathing, like the kind of knowledge that does not need a teacher because it was never learned. It was inherited. Her face was wet. Her breathing was ragged. But when she spoke again, her voice had changed. The grief was still there, vast, oceanic, irreducible, but something harder had risen through it. Iron pressing up through water. Where were you? I'm here now. No. The word landed like a door slamming shut. 7 years ago. Where were you? She told him. And every sentence was a blade. She had called, left messages, written letters, actual paper letters, because when the phone was disconnected, she had no other way to reach him. She had begged him to come find her, to explain, to tell her why. She had waited by a mailbox that never held a response, sat by a phone that never rang, walked to a building she used to enter freely, and found herself turned away by security staff who looked through her as if she were a stranger. He never came. Not once. Not ever. I never received anything, he said. Your number was dead. Your apartment was empty. I thought you left. I was pushed out. No hesitation, no qualification. A statement delivered with the weight of 7 years of certainty. Someone pressured my landlord. My phone was disconnected, not by me. And a man showed up at my door, a man I recognized from your household. The air in the hallway changed. Something cold moved through it. Not a draft, but the atmospheric shift that happens when a truth that has been buried begins pushing toward surface. He gave me an envelope of cash. Her voice was steady now, controlled. The investigative journalist delivering findings she had verified 1,000 times inside her own mind. He told me you wanted me gone, that you said I was a liability to your corporate image, that you said, her voice cracked, just once, a single fracture in the iron. She forced it closed. He told me you said I was a mistake you needed to clean up. Rhett's face went white. Not pale. White. The color of a man watching the foundation of his life split open beneath his feet. I never said that. Yovien, I never. It doesn't matter if you said it. She cut him off. Not with volume, with precision. Because I believed it. For 7 years, Rhett. I believed it. Because you made it easy to believe. She rose. Slowly. Rising from the threshold until she was at her full height, one hand still on the doorframe, looking down at him where he knelt in the hallway. You loved me in rooms with drawn curtains. You never once let me stand beside you in the light. You never introduced me to your world as the woman you loved. I was a secret, and secrets are easy to erase. Her voice dropped, not softer, but deeper. The register of a woman speaking from the center of a wound that had never closed. Do you understand what that cost me? Not just my daughter, my belief that I was worth fighting for. Every word landed with surgical precision. He did not flinch. He did not defend himself. He did not offer explanations or context or mitigating circumstances. He knelt on that worn carpet and received what she was giving him, because she had earned the right to give it, and he had earned the obligation to receive it. I understand, he said. Then you understand why I can't fall back into your arms. Not because I don't want to. Her voice softened, and for one moment, one breath, he heard the woman who used to trace words on his skin in the dark. The woman who wrote ours in the margin of a book she carried everywhere. But because the last time I trusted you with my heart, I lost my daughter. The heating system ticked. Once, twice, marking the seconds of a life that should have been lived differently. 2 people on opposite sides of a threshold that represented everything distance had taken from them. Somewhere in this exchange, in the space between accusation and admission, Yovien said something about the kind of strength it took to survive what was done to her, the kind of endurance that does not announce itself. Not the loud kind, she said, the quiet kind, the kind that stays. Rhett did not react. He did not recognize the words. He had no way of knowing that 40 minutes away, on a bench by a window in a children's home at the end of a gravel road, an 8-year-old girl had used those exact words to describe a character in a story. The same phrasing, the same cadence, the same meaning. Mother and daughter, separated for 7 years, strangers to each other, speaking the same sentence in different rooms, days apart. a thread of language woven through shared blood that no distance could sever and no silence could erase. Rhett asked the question he already knew the answer to, his voice low, flat, dangerous in its quietness. Who came to your door? But his mind was already connecting what he had refused to see for years. The way certain conversations had been gently redirected whenever Yovien's name drifted close. The seamless way she had been removed from his life, so cleanly, so completely, that he had accepted it as a departure rather than an extraction. The fact that erasing someone this thoroughly required intimate access to his personal life, his schedule, his relationships, his vulnerabilities, his trust. It required someone who loved him enough to decide what was best for him. Someone who had been there since before he could form memories. Someone whose presence was so constant, so foundational, that questioning him would have felt like questioning the ground beneath his own feet. Jovien watched his face. She saw the moment the connection completed, the instant the last piece locked into place, and his expression changed from confusion to recognition, to something that looked like the ground opening beneath a man who thought he was standing on solid earth. "You know who it was," she said. Not a question. Rhett did not answer. His jaw tightened until the muscles in his face stood out like cables. His hands closed into fists at his sides, not in violence, but in the effort of containing something enormous inside his chest. Something that could not be released here, not in this hallway. Not in front of this woman who had already suffered enough from the failures of men who claimed to love people while making decisions on their behalf. The man who stole Rhett's family was not an enemy. He was not a rival. He was not a stranger operating from malice or greed. He was the man who taught Rhett to tie his shoes. The man who drove him to school. The man who sat outside his bedroom door the night his mother died and stayed there until morning. A quiet presence holding vigil over a boy's worst night. But first, before any reckoning could begin, before any confrontation could take place, there was a little girl waiting at the end of a gravel road. A girl who pressed her palm against book covers and tapped wrists twice and looked at empty spaces beside her as if expecting someone to fill them. She deserved to meet the woman whose eyes she had inherited before anyone else's reckoning could begin. The doorstep. 3 feet of hallway carpet holding 7 years of silence between them. Yovien's indictment, delivered with the precision of a woman who had spent years sharpening her pain into language. The drawn curtains, the secret she had been forced to become. The man from Rhett's household who arrived at her door with an envelope of cash and a lie that cost her everything. And the name neither of them said aloud, because saying it would mean the man who raised Rhett had dismantled his family with steady, devoted hands. But before Rhett could confront that truth, there was something more important. 40 minutes away, in a children's home at the end of a gravel road, a little girl was waiting. A girl who did not know that the 2 people driving toward her were the parents she had never had. And for the first time in 7 years, neither of them would have to walk through that door alone. The drive took 90 minutes. It should have taken 60, but Rhett drove slower than usual, not from caution, but from the weight of what sat inside the car with them. 2 people who had once known each other's breathing patterns in the dark, who had traced words on each other's skin, who had created a life together without ever knowing it, now sharing the same vehicle with a decade of unsaid words between them, and no idea which ones were safe to speak first. They talked in small, careful sentences, the kind of language 2 people use when the ground between them is uncertain and every step might shift something. She asked practical questions. How long had he been visiting? How did the sponsorship begin? What was Ivy's daily life like? He answered each one fully, without embellishment, without trying to make himself sound better than the facts allowed. She listened with the focused intensity of a woman accustomed to absorbing testimony, but her hands, folded in her lap, trembled in a way no professional discipline could steady. He did not try to explain away the drawn curtains speech, did not try to reframe or soften it. The weight of what she had said on that doorstep rode with them like a third passenger, and he carried it without complaint. For the first time in his life, in a life built on commanding outcomes and constructing solutions out of problems, He did not try to build something over the top of his pain. He did not try to fix it. He sat inside it. Let it press against his ribs. Let it fill the space between them. Halfway to Briarwood, she saw it happen. His grip on the steering wheel tightened until bone pressed white against skin, tendons standing out along his forearms like cables drawn taut. His jaw locked. The muscles along the side of his face hardened. His breathing changed. Shorter, sharper, pulled through clenched teeth. Something volcanic was pressing against the inside of his chest, and she could see the surface of him straining to hold it in. 7 years of theft. 7 years of letters that never arrived. 7 years of a daughter sleeping in a children's home, while her father ate alone at a table surrounded by empty chairs. All of it carried out by hands he trusted more than his own. Yovian recognized the look on his face, because she had worn it herself. That specific expression where fury and grief fuse into something the body can barely contain. She did not speak, did not reach for him, did not try to soothe or redirect. She knew from her own experience that this kind of fire does not respond to comfort. It responds to time and choice. He loosened his grip, slowly, deliberately, one finger at a time relaxing against the leather until his hands rested with a steadiness that was entirely manufactured. Not because the rage had passed. It had not gone anywhere. It was still there, pressing against every wall inside him. But in 15 minutes he would walk through a door and see his daughter. And she would not, could not, be allowed to see what was burning inside him. Whatever reckoning was coming, it would come later, behind a different door, in front of a different person. Gravel crunched under the tires. The oak trees closed in overhead. The wooden sign appeared. Every child deserves a story. And for the first time since he had started making this drive years ago, those words belonged to him in a way no mission statement ever had. The reading room. Late afternoon light falling through the windows in warm gold bars across the floor. The same shelves lined with mismatched books. The same heavy fire doors echoing somewhere down the corridor. And there, in the far corner, cross-legged on the floor with a book open in her lap, Ivy looked up. The grin started in her eyes. It always did, a brightening that began somewhere deep and worked its way outward until her whole face was transformed, unguarded, full, the kind of smile that existed only because no one had taught her to hold it back yet. Mr. Calloway. She was up and moving before the book hit the floor, sneakers squeaking on tile, one lace untied as always, crashing into his legs with the force that was their ritual. He crouched down, held her, and for 3 seconds he closed his eyes and let himself feel what he now knew this was: a father holding his daughter. Not charity, not generosity. A father holding his child. She pulled back, looked past his shoulder, tilted her head. That tilt, the one he could never explain, the one that had always tugged at something unnamed inside his chest. Now he knew why. Now he knew whose gesture lived inside her. The exact same angle, the exact same pause. Who's that? Yovienne stood near the doorway. She had not moved. Her hands were clasped in front of her, tightly, knuckles pressed together as if she were physically holding herself in place. Her eyes were locked on Ivy with an expression that held 7 years of imagining suddenly colliding with reality. The curls, the honey-colored eyes, the grin, everything she had pictured in the dark on the worst nights, now standing 20 feet away in untied sneakers. "This is a friend of mine," Rhett said, his voice steady, careful, holding the edges of this moment with the precision of a man carrying something made of glass. "She's been wanting to meet you for a very long time." Ivy approached Yovienne the way she approached book covers, with the same careful seriousness, the same deliberate assessment. She stopped 3 feet away, studied Jovienne's face with the unfiltered scrutiny only children possess. No politeness, no social performance, just pure observation, taking her time, reading something the adults in the room could not see. "You have nice eyes," Ivy said. Jovienne's breath caught. She crouched down, slowly, The way you lower yourself when you are not sure your legs will hold. Until she was at Ivy's height. So do you, sweetheart. Do you like books? I love books. Ivy glanced back at Rhett, then leaned toward Jovienne with the conspiratorial lean she used when sharing information of critical importance. Her voice dropped to a whisper loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. Mr. Calloway brings me books every month. He reads to me. He does the voices and everything. She cupped one small hand beside her mouth. His villain voice is terrible, though. Jovienne laughed. Short, broken, beautiful. The sound of a woman who had not laughed from this particular depth in 7 years. A laugh that came from the same place Ivy's came from. The same lean backward, the same hand rising involuntarily toward the collarbone. Mother and daughter, 3 feet apart, mirroring each other without knowing it. I bet I can do better, Jovienne said. The 3 of them sat on the bench by the window. The same bench. The same afternoon light. Rhett read aloud, his voice finding the familiar rhythm of their Saturday ritual, the cadence that Ivy's body recognized and leaned into before her mind registered the words. She leaned against his arm on one side. On the other, she held Jovienne's hand, casually, naturally, with the effortless decisiveness of a child who has assessed someone and determined they belong. No ceremony, no announcement. Just small fingers reaching for larger ones and closing around them as if they had been doing this forever. For the first time in 7 years, there was no empty space beside him, no gap on the bench where someone should have been sitting. The 3 of them filled it completely, shoulder to shoulder, the warmth of 3 bodies pressed together on a wooden bench with sunlight on their faces. And the simple physical fact of that, the ordinary weight of it, was worth more than every room in his penthouse, more than the glass towers, more than the table surrounded by chairs where no one ever sat. Jovienne memorized everything. She had spent 7 years imagining what her daughter's hands would feel like, how much weight they would carry, whether the fingers would be long like hers or squared at the tips. Now those fingers were wrapped around her own, warm and impossibly real, and Ivy's thumb was tracing absent circles on her palm. Small, unconscious movements, the same motion Jovienne made when she traced letters on skin in the dark, carried through blood, the body's memory outlasting every separation the world could impose. Ivy looked up at Jovienne during a pause in the story, studied her again. That same unfiltered gaze, but different now, deeper, as if she were looking past the surface at something she could sense but not name. You feel like someone I already know, she said, simply, without drama, the way children state facts that adults would spend years trying to articulate. Jovienne nearly came apart. The sentence wrapped around something she had protected for 7 years, the hope she kept trying to kill because it hurt too much to carry. She felt it crack open now, not painfully, but with the relief of a door finally giving way after years of pressure. She held. She did not break. She squeezed those tiny fingers and smiled. A real smile, not a performance, not a brave face, but the genuine, trembling, devastating smile of a mother who has been found by the child she never stopped looking for. Maybe you do, sweetheart. Maybe you do. After the visit, in the parking lot, the afternoon was fading. The oak trees threw long shadows across the gravel. The building behind them, red brick softened by decades, held the faint sound of children's voices through closed windows. Jovienne leaned against the side of the car, pressed her forehead against her arm, and cried. Not the controlled tears of the doorstep, not the iron-willed composure of the hallway confrontation. These were deep, shaking sobs from a place beyond language, the place where a mother stores every bedtime she missed, every fever she was not there to cool, every nightmare she could not soothe, every morning she woke up reaching for a child who was not beside her. 7 years of accumulated absence pouring out in a parking lot at the end of a gravel road, while oak trees older than any of them stood witness. Rhett placed his hand on her back, gently between her shoulders, not possessively, not with the presumption of a man who believed he had the right, just present, the way someone stands beside a person who is breaking and offers the only thing they have, the weight of their hand and the steadiness of not leaving. She did not pull away. She leaned into him, slightly, just enough that he could feel the curve of her shoulder against his chest. Her breath caught, a sharp intake he recognized from 7 years ago, the same sound she made right before she would begin tracing invisible words on his skin. His hand trembled against her back. "She doesn't know I'm her mother." The words came between sobs, fractured, raw, each one costing her something. "She should have grown up knowing my voice, the way I sing off-key when I cook, the way I check under the bed twice because I know monsters aren't real, but I check anyway because that's what mothers do." She pressed her lips together, hard, forcing the next wave down long enough to finish. "Someone stole that from me, from her, from all three of us." Rhett did not explain, did not redirect, did not offer solutions or strategies or the kind of decisive action that had defined his entire adult life. For once, he did not try to fix anything. He stood in the parking lot with his hand on her back, and he said the only thing that was true. "They did, and you deserved better. You deserve to be her mother every single day. And nothing I say can give those days back." He paused. The words that came next were not the words of a CEO. They were the words of a man who had finally stopped building monuments to distraction and started standing in the wreckage of what he should have fought for. "But I am here, and I am not going anywhere, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure that the woman our daughter just called someone I already know becomes the mother she has been waiting for." It was not enough. They both knew it. 7 years cannot be repaid with a sentence in a parking lot, no matter how true the sentence is. But it was a start, and starts matter, because every story Ivy had ever loved began with someone deciding to stay instead of leave. The parking lot was quiet. A crow called from the oak trees, sharp, solitary, cutting through the late afternoon. Gravel shifted under their feet. The light had turned the color of warm honey, falling across Yovien's face, catching the tracks on her cheeks. She straightened, wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, looked back at the building where her daughter was still inside, alive, safe, loved imperfectly, but loved constantly, and something settled in her expression. Not resolution, not forgiveness, something closer to the beginning of both. This story has one final chapter, and it is the one that changes everything. If you have made it this far, you already know this is not just a story. Hit that subscribe button so you are here when it all comes together. You do not want to miss what happens behind the last door. Rhett drove Jovienne to her hotel. They parted at the entrance with a look that held more than words could carry. Gratitude and grief, and the fragile beginning of something that did not have a name yet, because naming it felt too dangerous. She walked inside. He watched the glass doors close behind her, sat in the car for a full minute without starting the engine. Then he drove. The route home was familiar. Every turn memorized, every mile marker a landmark of the life he had built, around an absence he had never questioned hard enough. But tonight, the drive felt different. The silence inside the car had a destination. There was one more door Rhett Calloway needed to walk through tonight. Not a hospital door, not a brownstone apartment door, not the front door of Briarwood, his own front door, behind which, in a kitchen with marble floors and cold silence, a man was pouring coffee the way he had poured it 1,000 times before. A man who had been waiting, whether he knew it or not, for 7 years for this exact moment to arrive. DNA, Yovienne found, Ivy meeting her mother on a bench by a window without knowing who she was, only knowing that this woman felt like someone she already recognized. Yovienne's grief in the parking lot, deep and shaking, and 7 years overdue. Rhett's promise that was not enough, but was the first true thing he had said in a decade. And now, the drive home. A man heading toward a door he had walked through 10,000 times, about to open it as a stranger. Everything in Rhett Calloway's life had been leading to this moment. The moment he would stand in front of the man who raised him and ask the only question that mattered. The front door opened into silence. Not the comfortable silence of a home settling into evening. The pressurized silence of a space engineered to eliminate every trace of the outside world. Tall ceilings that absorbed sound and returned nothing. Marble floors that held the cold regardless of season. The mechanical whir of automated blinds adjusting to the hour. the sharp, isolated click of his shoes against stone, each footstep returning to him from surfaces that had never absorbed the warmth of a family's noise. He walked past the dining room, stopped, the table stretched before him in the low light, long, polished, gleaming faintly in the glow from the hallway. 12 chairs surrounding it, all empty. He had walked past this table 1,000 times, eaten alone at its head 1,000 nights, accepted its emptiness as the natural condition of a successful man's home. Tonight, for the first time, the sight of it turned his stomach, not metaphorically, physically. His hand found the doorframe. He stood there, staring at those 12 chairs and understanding what they had always been. Not furniture, not ambition, evidence. 12 places set for people who were never given the chance to sit down. He kept walking. The kitchen light was on. Dorian stood at the counter, his back to the doorway. A French press sat beside him, glass and chrome, the same one he had used for as long as Rhett could remember. His hands moved with the kind of precision that comes from decades of repetition, pressing the plunger slowly, steadily, the dark liquid yielding beneath the mesh. He poured the coffee into a white ceramic cup. No rush, no wasted motion. The same controlled grace he brought to every task, every pressed shirt, every polished surface, every invisible adjustment that kept this household running with the silent efficiency of a man who believed that order was the highest form of devotion. Rhett stood in the doorway, coat still on, keys still in his hand. He looked at this man, the man who had shaped the landscape of his entire life, not through grand gestures, but through presence, through permanence, the hand that steadied a bicycle on a summer afternoon, the voice that read report cards aloud with pride that never needed to be performed, the figure standing at the back of every school auditorium, every awards ceremony, every milestone, never center stage, never asking to be acknowledged, but always there, always watching, always certain that he knew what was best. That certainty was what made this unbearable, because Rhett could see it clearly now. The architecture of a 7-year deception built by hands that genuinely believed they were protecting him. Dorian had never mentioned Jovienne after she vanished. Not once. Her name had been surgically removed from the vocabulary of this household, and the absence had been so clean, so seamless, that Rhett had never noticed it was intentional. Conversations that wandered anywhere near her memory were gently steered elsewhere. A question about dinner, a reminder about a morning obligation, a small domestic observation placed like a road marker redirecting traffic away from a closed route. Phone calls filtered, mail sorted by hands that decided what arrived and what disappeared. A landlord contacted by someone speaking with the quiet authority of the Callaway name. An envelope of cash assembled, delivered, accompanied by words calculated to sever a bond permanently, words Rhett never spoke, attached to a cruelty he never authorized, deployed against a woman whose only mistake was loving a man who kept her hidden. "Shall I bring this to your study?" Dorian asked. Still facing the counter, his voice perfectly calibrated, the same tone, the same rhythm, the same domestic steadiness he had offered every evening for decades. Routine, familiar. Rhett set his keys on the marble counter. Slowly, deliberately, metal clicked against stone. A small, sharp sound that filled the kitchen the way a single note fills an empty hall. He looked at the back of Dorian's head, the grey hair, the straight posture, the steady shoulders. 4 words. Quiet. Dead cold. Each one placed with the same precision Dorian himself had used to dismantle a life. "Where are the letters, Dorian?" The cup left Dorian's hand. Not thrown, released, as if the muscles in his fingers simply stopped receiving instructions. White ceramic struck marble and detonated. A sharp, percussive crack that echoed through the house, bouncing off tall ceilings and cold floors and 12 empty chairs. Coffee exploded across the stone in a dark, spreading bloom, black liquid racing outward, steam rising from the surface in thin, curling wisps. Neither man moved. The silence that followed was louder than the impact. Coffee pooled across the marble, creeping toward Rhett's shoes. The steam thinned. Dorian's hand hung in the air where the cup had been. Suspended, trembling, the fingers slightly curled around a shape that no longer existed. The hand of a man who had held a secret for 7 years and just felt it shatter against the floor alongside the porcelain. Dorian did not yell, did not confess, did not collapse or beg or offer the flood of justification that a lesser person might have unleashed to fill the silence. His first instinct, the one that revealed everything about who he was and what he valued above all else, was to bend down, slowly, his knees finding the cold marble, and pick up a piece of the broken ceramic. He held it in his palm, examined it, turned it between his fingers as if assessing damage, as if the cup could be repaired, as if he could restore order to this room, to this moment, to the careful, meticulous architecture of control he had maintained for 7 years, the architecture that had just collapsed with 4 words, spoken in a voice he had never heard from the boy he raised. He reached for a second piece, then a third, gathering fragments from the dark puddle of cooling coffee, his movements growing less steady, less precise, the control he prized above all things failing him in the one moment it mattered most. Then he stopped. His hands went still, ceramic pieces resting in his wet palm, coffee seeping between his fingers. He looked up from the floor, and his eyes met Rhett's, and in them, for the first time in decades, there was fear. Not the manufactured concern of a man managing a crisis, not the careful recalibration of someone adjusting a strategy, genuine fear, the kind that lives at the bottom of a person who has always known that the structure they built was temporary, that the walls they raised around a lie would eventually give way, that the person they loved most would one day stand above them with the truth in their eyes and ask the question they had never prepared an answer for. The silence stretched, coffee cooling in the spaces between broken ceramic. 2 men, one standing, one kneeling, in a kitchen that now held the weight of every stolen letter, every intercepted call, every lie delivered on a doorstep with an envelope of cash. Every night a little girl fell asleep in a children's home, while her father ate alone and her mother searched through databases in a city hundreds of miles away. 3 lives held in separate rooms that one man's steady, devoted, catastrophic hands had built. Somewhere in this house, behind a wall, beneath a floorboard, locked in a drawer Rhett was never meant to open, were the letters Jovienne had written. 7 years of words committed to paper because paper was all she had left when every other channel had been sealed shut. Pleas, questions, confessions, she was afraid to say aloud. Did they still exist? Had Dorian kept them, filed away with the same meticulous care he applied to everything, unable to destroy them because even his devotion had limits it could not cross? Or had he burned them, fed them page by page into flame, watching a woman's heartbreak curl and blacken and disappear? And if they survived, if they were somewhere in these walls, what would Rhett find when he finally read them? The handwriting deteriorating across the years, from hopeful to desperate to resigned, tracing the exact trajectory of a heart breaking in slow motion while the man it was addressed to lived 40 minutes away and never knew. And Dorian had not acted alone. Rhett understood this, the way you understand something. Your mind has not fully assembled, but your body has already accepted. Intercepting mail required access. Pressuring a landlord required legal weight. Attorneys who filed papers without asking questions, but altering a child's placement records. Ensuring that Ivy's intake at Briarwood was processed in a way that made her invisible to even a trained investigative journalist. That required more than one man's hands. That required a network. People who were paid or persuaded into compliance, people who looked away because the Calloway name carried a gravity that bent rules around it. How many knew? How deep did this reach into the infrastructure of the life Rhett thought he controlled? And what other decisions had been made in his name, with his authority, without his knowledge or consent? And 40 minutes away, past the highway, past the county road, down the gravel drive lined with oaks, a little girl was sleeping tonight with something new inside her chest, a warmth she could not name, the residue of a woman's hand around hers, a woman whose eyes she recognized without understanding why. Ivy did not know that the man who brought her books every first Saturday was her father. She did not know that the woman with the nice eyes was her mother. She did not know that the 2 taps she gave his wrist were a language inherited from a woman she had never consciously met. She did not know that her whole life was about to change. And when that truth was finally spoken, how do you tell an 8-year-old that the people who loved her most were standing right in front of her the entire time? Some stories begin with a question. This one began with 2 taps on a wrist, a signal from a daughter to a father, sent across a gap neither of them knew existed. The signal was received, 6 years late, but received. If this story reached you, if you felt it land somewhere you were not expecting, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, so you are here for part 2 because there is so much more to come. And leave me a comment. What do you think Dorian will say when the silence finally breaks? I would love to hear your answer. Until next time, Mr. Harlan. The narration lifted away from the cold kitchen, away from the marble and the pooling coffee and the broken pieces of a white ceramic cup, away from the fear in an old man's eyes and the dead cold fury in a younger man's voice, away from the penthouse and the glass towers and the table surrounded by chairs where no one ever sat. It carried back to Briarwood, night. The children's home at the end of the gravel road. The hallway light was on. Someone had remembered. The faint hum of old radiators working against the chill, the distant soft sounds of a building full of sleeping children, a cough from behind one door, the creak of bed springs from another, the shuffled breathing of small bodies at rest. Ivy was in her bed, curls spread across a flat pillow, blanket pulled to her chin, tucked by a staff member who cared, who always cared, who did their best with what they had. Her hand rested on the cover of a book, palm flat against it, the way she always held them, eyes closed, fingers spread, greeting an old friend even in sleep. She did not know what was coming. She did not know that 2 people who loved her were fighting their way back to her through 7 years of silence and lies and a betrayal committed in the name of love. She did not know that the gesture she made every Saturday, 2 taps on a wrist, quick, light, instinctive, was a message sent across a distance neither she nor the man receiving it had ever understood. She was just a girl, asleep, with a book under her hand, waiting, the way she had always waited, patient and quiet and full of a faith she could not explain, for the story to begin.